Slide. Oh, okay. Thanks, guys. So it is really an honor and a privilege to be here, considering the speakers who I have seen online speak here in the past. So I'm really excited. I'm not just a health strategist and a health advocate, but I'm a really big advocate of the culture that Charlie has created here. First of all, before I even start, I want to shout out to the technical team for helping me get this thing started with my Apple product, and to both Stephanie and Sarah and everybody who made this possible. This kind of happened last minute in the last week or so, so it was very exciting. And so, you know, it was on the efforts of a lot of people. But one of the things that I'm really excited about is that Charlie often talks about culture. And one thing that I really am a huge advocate of is events like this, having more events like this and creating more culture like this. Meaning today we have the advent of using webinars, and there are people who are joining us today from other parts of the country, and that's cool. But being in a room with like-minded people and getting the information to people in this sort of setting where you guys, for those of you who work at Next Jump, spend a whole lot of time with, right? This is like a surrogate family. Our immediate families are becoming smaller and smaller, and we have, you know, 10, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 people that we spend upwards of 40 to 60 hours a week with. And that's where we start to develop a lot of our own personal beliefs, not just about health and wellness and weight loss and nutrition, but political beliefs, our social beliefs, right? That's where we start to form a lot of those things. And there's a lot of confusion out there. And one of the things that I've noticed is that these companies like this all over New York City are filled with all people with all who belong to all sorts of health and wellness and fitness communities. You've got your CrossFitters, you've got your Soul Cycle, you've got your juicing and detoxing, you've got your vegetarians and vegan, you have your dairy and gluten phobics, you have all these people who are sharing essentially the same space. And it's just causing an enormous amount of confusion. And what may be right for one person isn't necessarily right for another. More than anything else, I hope for you to get out of this is when you start to take a look at some of the things that I'm going to share with you today, you'll hopefully start to have a little bit more empathy and compassion for yourselves, as well as the people you work with who might be having some sort of health challenge or some sort of challenge with weight. By the way, I know that Next Jump is all about transparency, so full disclosure. I am not licensed at anything. I am not, I am self-taught. I'm a slow learner and really dyslexic. It took me a long time to figure this out, and sharing this with you helps me to figure it out for myself. So let me pretty much just tell you how I got started and what I want to do today. First of all, I hope to share some new ways of thinking with you. This is usually what I ask people, to take your current ideas and beliefs about weight loss, nutrition, diet, and exercise, and put them under your chair, leave them in the back of the room. You're welcome to take them with you when you leave. But for now, I'm going to ask you to make some room for some new ideas and a new way of thinking about your health. So how did I get here? Starting to feel as a fitness trainer. My ambition was to work with professional athletes. That was the top of the food chain. That's what I thought would challenge me the most. And because of that, I winded up working with a lot of people who were known to be at the time the top sports performance specialist. That led me to start and take a closer look at nutrition. It was obviously no way I was going to be able to work with elite athletes if I didn't know something about nutrition. But it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years after being in the field, and I got started really young. I didn't get into the field until I was about 29 years old. I had my own little health crisis. Nothing life-threatening, but it took me about 2.5 years to figure out, and it was an annoyance, right? I didn't have energy. I was not myself. And it took about 6, 7, 8, 9 people that I consulted with over those 2 years, and some very thoughtful practitioners that helped me figure things out. And then, knowing what I knew at the time, I was able to rehabilitate myself. But that experience made me think, how many people are trying to lose weight or not themselves? They don't feel well. And maybe they're relying on maybe 1 or 2 people to consult or help them, but there's no cohesiveness, right? They're getting different ideas from different people. They're not sure what to do. And so at the time, I decided to form my company as a management company, where I would take all these ideas that they have and create some cohesiveness for them and help them manage the process. Today, I find that there's a lot of people who come to me, and it seems like nutrition, wellness. It's become a real trend. So people have a lot of ideas and they have already some pieces of the puzzle. So as a strategist, I kind of help them start to make sense of it and prioritize things, okay? So that leads me to, we talked about a new way of thinking, belief systems. And I love this quote. This is Hans Selye. You're going to hear more about him. He's the pioneer in the study of stress on humans. And when he was asked this question, what is the most stressful condition a person can face? And I love his answer. Because I know here at Next Jump, and I know you guys are big fans of Simon, you need to believe in something. So that leads me to the question I get asked most often, which is, what is my philosophy? This is what people ask me the most. And I used to get really frustrated when people ask me this, because the truth of the matter is that I believe mostly in function, and I always have. And I've found a whole community of people, and it was a really humbling experience. I got off the internet for a couple of years. I was just so overwhelmed and frustrated with the constant debate over what was right. Low fat, low carbs. And I just had to get off a little bit. When I got back on, I found some really, really ambitious, young, smart, thoughtful people out there who really had no interest in commercializing their thought process. And we were on the same page in that we really were focusing more on physiology. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is their work. This is not my work. This is stuff that I've collected over time. And one thing they've been able to do, and I try to do as well, is to make it more palatable, right? More usable, make it more practical for you guys. So it's really more about physiology, right? First and foremost, you need to meet your physiological, more importantly, your metabolic needs. Making changes to your diet, your lifestyle, anything that influences health, that will improve your physiology and overall health. So, how do we do that? My aim, very simple, is to get you to start, whoops, let's get back there. Can we get back one? All right, that's good. So we'll go through for long. There. Okay. All right, maybe not. Not so much. But it's to get you thinking more about how your body works, rather than all these ideas, concepts, and theories about wellness and nutrition. Once you get a better idea of how things work, you'll find that you'll have less anxiety about what it is that you eat and what's on your plate. So health. Why is it that it eludes so many people? In particular, the people who are trying to be healthy the most, right? You're vegetarians, you're vegans, you're gluten and dairy phobics especially, right? These are people who are deliberately trying to do something to improve the quality of their health. What is health, really? For a long time, health was defined as being free of disease, but it's much more than that, right? I mean, it's not just physical, it's mental and social, psychological, right? I have found in my experience over the last 3, 4, 5 years especially, and I've been at this a long time, but I really made some radical breakthroughs in the last few years. I've found that metabolism is truly the foundation to health. And when we think about metabolism, I think a lot of people have thought of it in the way most people define it, right? Metabolic rate. Essentially, how your body burns fuel or burns energy, essentially, right? Food is energy, and how it burns it as to make energy. So calories, food, energy, and how you burn it and use it. But it's much, much, much more than that. This is one of the better definitions that I like. It's a sum of all the physiological events that take place in your body that turn food, the water you drink, the air you breathe, all the macro and micronutrients, meaning carbohydrates and fats, minerals and vitamins, and making it into what we know as life, being able to sustain life. It's all these things. So when we think of metabolism, the first thing most people think of is weight loss. And it's, again, much more than just how many calories you can eat before you start gaining weight. And it is the exact opposite of dieting, calorie restriction, and food deprivation. And you'll see how and why. Yeah, I like this definition because it kind of encompasses everything, right? It's essentially your personal chemistry, and all the major players are involved: the liver, the thyroid, your gastrointestinal system, your adrenal glands, your pancreas, and then all the water and food and oxygen and your genetics. All these things are playing a role. And the symphony is essentially all these things, all these glands that are pumping out hormones, and as you ingest food and water and air and all the metabolic pathways that take place. That's essentially what metabolism is. Okay, so the whoops, this thing is very, can we go back? Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So in the truest sense, metabolism is the rate in which we produce energy, okay? And there's a few different ways that it manifests that. A high body temperature, right? Now, typically when we think of high body temperature, we're thinking of fever, right? It's one of the first interventions that are used as soon as you go see your doctor, or they may ask you if you have a fever. And you're going to see how a high temperature is actually very important for metabolic rate. The other is a resting pulse. Same thing. Conventionally, a low pulse rate, healthy. Maybe not so much. But really, the biggest is physical energy. It's how much energy we have in our body, and how fast we're producing energy at a cellular level. Now, you already saw this slide, but this is how most people are relying on finding ways of energy. This little puppy, over 1.5 million of these are sold a day. He's made a living, okay? And at $3 a pop, I gotta tell you, 2 ounces, it's got to be doing something. You wouldn't invest $3 in a 2-ounce shot that didn't work. So certainly it seems to be making a difference. When he started this, it was a little tonic he created, and he wanted to call it a focus shot or a focus drink. And the FDA said, no, you can't use the word focus. He's like, why not? He's like, well, you can't use it. So we're going to call it an energy shot. Now, he owns this entire market. There's nobody else who can touch him. There's a huge energy drink market, but the energy shot is owned by this guy. And anybody who's even tried to compete failed miserably. When this thing doesn't work, we start looking for a little bit more intense, something that's going to be a little bit more powerful, a little bigger bang for our buck. And you're starting to see, or you've seen over the years, although they say the sales of Adderall have declined in the last 1.5 to 2 years, there's a lot of people who are using this not just to try and do some kind of task, like take an exam or maybe some kind of deadline that they have to do, but they're using it recreationally. They don't even have the energy to get up and do something, so they'll just take one just so they can get out and do something fun. So obviously energy is definitely a problem. We can't talk about metabolism. When we talk about metabolism, I should say, most people think of it as fast and slow. This is conventionally how we think of metabolism. But for the sake of today's discussion, we're going to think of it as high and low, which is actually more appropriate. Okay? So your thyroid is basically the major player. It governs essentially your metabolism. Every facet of metabolism determines the rate and efficiency in which your body produces energy, right? So when energy is decreased, it will start to manifest itself in some way. Not all, but potentially any one of these diseases will start to manifest themselves, right? From constipation to headaches, migraines, anxiety, and depression, hormone imbalances, severe PMS, that sort of thing. What you need to remember, and I kind of tossed in there because I wanted to remind myself as well as you guys, is that we all have different needs at different times. This is my mantra. You must meet your metabolic needs in real time. Not what you needed 2 years ago, not what you'll need 2 years from now, what you need today. If you are trying to lose weight for some sort of social event, or maybe you're trying to change your body composition for some kind of athletic event, you've got to consider everything that's happening to you between now and that event. Because if you're strictly preparing for that event and focusing only on calories and how well you're recovering from your workouts and how often you work out, well, rarely is that going to be the experience unless you are a professional athlete, right? Most cases, most people still going on about their lives. And when you consider what they need to do to be successful at the task, or because they want to drop a size or two for that weekend, what are going to be the compromises that you're going to have to do to your health in order to achieve that goal? So, okay, so when we talk about metabolism, we've got to talk about stress and the connection between the two. So essentially, when metabolism is high, stress is low. This is typically why when we're younger, our youthful metabolism, we have supple skin, we have lots of energy, we sleep soundly, we move our bowels every day, everything's good. And it's more thyroid driven. Now when metabolism is down, stress usually goes up. And as we age, we take on more responsibility, more liability, more obligation, and sure enough, stress starts to go up, metabolism starts to go down. And this is more stress or adrenaline driven metabolism. Now, as I mentioned, aging is a natural process, and as we age, the metabolism will go down. Just normal. We start to drop anabolics by the time we're 30, 31 years old. It's part of the reason why most athletes want to sign a contract by the time he's 31, because he's pretty much done. Okay? He's hoping to squeeze 7 or 8 more years out, but the likelihood is that he's already been at that playing that sport since he's 4 years old, professionally for the last 8 or 9 years. He's been under enormous physiological and psychological stress, and physiologically, he's losing all his anabolics. That's why the advent of performance-enhancing drugs, that's a whole nother topic. I could probably come back and talk about that as well. But you can drive your metabolism using diet, lifestyle, and controlling whatever you can in your environment to improve your metabolic rate or your metabolism as you age. And obviously, manage whatever you can regarding stress. So this is kind of a little analogy that I was working on. It's not perfect, but I was listening to Bill Nye do a talk on climate change and weather, and I thought, metabolism right away, right? So essentially, your metabolism is a lot like climate, in that climate is all these variables that are constant. And they have to be constant for a long period of time before that region is declared a particular climate, usually 25, 30 years. Even if the weather does change from time to time, it's consistent. So if the temperature drops significantly, it may for 3, 4 months, and then it'll go up again, but usually in and around the same time and also at the same temperatures. So, and there's a lot of variables, right? There's winds and barometer and humidity. It'll all be very consistent. And that's a lot like your metabolism. So if we think of it in this way, stress is weather. It's the day-to-day stuff, right? We have all kinds of stresses that are coming at us every day that can affect the metabolism. And finally, the last thing, well, you know what, I put this in here because I wanted to make a distinction. We'll talk more about it later, is anxiety and stress and the difference. Anxiety is typically perceived. There are things that haven't happened yet that we're worried about that may happen, a lot like the forecast. And typically, they never happen, right? Or not in the way you thought they were going to happen. But we spend a lot of time thinking about those things. And that can also have a radical effect on your metabolism. Your umbrella is essentially your diet, your lifestyle, and whatever it is you can control in your environment. Now, here's how it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be when I started to put it together. Because the reality is that climate change, there's a lot of science that suggests that the behavior and lifestyle of humans is what's causing climate change. Well, that's exactly what happens to our metabolism. It's actually your behavior, your lifestyle, the foods you ingest, the water you drink, the air you breathe that can have a radical change on your metabolism. Now, typically it takes a long time. In the same way, if you see changes in weather, it takes a really long time. But what's interesting is, what I've seen at least at almost 18, 19 years at this, in the last 10 years in particular, is it's changing faster. I see debilitating diseases in much younger people. Diseases that you typically wouldn't see in people in their 20s and 30s. We'll talk about why that's going on in a little bit more. So this is how we cope. And it's what I like to call metabolic change. That's what happens. So listen, all forms of stress aren't necessarily bad. There are good and bad. There are things that can challenge us physically, emotionally, that can make us smarter and stronger, right? Better at things, more resilient, more confident. Those are good forms of stress. And then there are bad forms of stress, things that usually, oftentimes, are unexpected. Debt, divorce, death, someone you care about very much unexpectedly taking ill. It could be, both disasters, for instance, man-made and otherwise. So Hurricane Sandy was sudden. Although we were kind of anticipating it for 24, 48 hours, we never expected it to be what it was. 2008, a lot of people saw that coming. They ignored it. There's a lot of collateral damage there. So all those sorts of things can be sources of stress that we didn't expect and are prolonged. So the thing about it is that all stress, the stress hormone switch is turned on basically in the same way. It can't make the distinction between psychological stresses or things that haven't happened yet that we're anticipating might happen and things that are actually happening to us, right? So is it really the stress that's crushing the metabolism, or is it the way we're coping with stress? And in most cases, it's a whole lot better at working at improving your metabolic rate or your metabolism than trying to lower the stress load. Because there's a lot of things that you're not going to have a lot of control of. And the thing about stress today is that it's compounded, right? It's not just one thing, there are several things, and they all have different levels of severity. Some things are more pressing that are causing you more stress. Others not so much, but there's still a source of stress to you. So it's usually more than one thing. Hans Selye says it's not the stress that kills us, it's the way we react to it, right? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. This gentleman here, he was the gentleman who coined the phrase fight or flight, what we know today, or is better known today as the stress response. And he didn't look at it as a bad thing. He thought it was pretty cool. He's like, it's interesting how we can make these changes physiologically when we're experiencing some sort of threat. He also coined the phrase homeostasis, and he talks about it in great detail in his book, The Wisdom of the Body. And he really just talks about, it's pretty cool how the body is actually trying to maintain some kind of equilibrium when all these things in our environment are changing and coming at us. Then Hans Selye picked it up in the 1950s, and he started to take a look at it in a different way. He's put together what he calls the general adaptation syndrome, and he looked at it in 3 phases. First, the alarm phase. This is you manifesting stress, right? Bear, lion, 104 emails, right? Boom, starts to manifest. The next phase is where there starts to become physiological change. First email on there, it's pressing. I need it in 2 hours. Boom. Physiological changes start to happen. Now, respiration changes, heart rate changes, things start to dilate, right? Adrenaline starts to pump, mobilize sugar. There's some sort of threat. The thing about it is, your body still can't make the distinction between the bear and the email you just received. So all the same changes are taking place. Depending on how pressing it is and the severity of the situation will depend on how heightened it is, the surge of the adrenaline. Okay, but the thing about it is, Selye kind of worked, a lot of people in the field actually believe that he missed out on a Nobel Prize because he got it wrong. He believed in the phase 3 that I had just up there, he believed that we at some point were completely depleted, that we just kind of ran out of hormones and we just would not be able to cope anymore, and that's what actually caused the disease or potential death. And Sapolsky, who I love, talks, this is the book's in his 3rd edition, and he says, humans activate stress response for reasons of psychological factors. That's simply not what the system evolved for. If you do it chronically, you will get sick. So what they figured out later on is that it's not that you'll actually be depleted necessarily of the hormones that are being made in order for you to protect you or give you the energy to be able to potentially survive the threat, but it's the stress response itself. And the fact that once we turn it on, we can't turn it off. But it wasn't meant to do that. It was meant for 3, 5, 7 minutes of sheer terror, if it even lasted that long, okay? Either you made it or you didn't. But now we're turning it on constantly. And like I mentioned, it's more than one. It's not just the bear. There are several. Some are bigger than others. Some are more threatening. Some seem cuddly, some not so much. So, defining stress. Essentially, emotional and physical tension in the body, something that makes us feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. So I wanted to give you kind of the distinction between these two. Because oftentimes this is a sort of worry caused by some sort of perceived threat or phobia, right? So if I were to ask someone in this room who has a fear of public speaking to come on up here and introduce yourself, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, there's going to be radical change in physiology, right? It could be as severe as regurgitation, defecation, urination, perspiration, change in respiration, right? We know all these things can happen, and all I did was ask her to come up here, or him, and introduce themselves. But the physiological response is the same. Anxiety is probably something I see more often than not, because when I ask people what is it that's causing them to be anxious, when they describe it in that way, particularly when they're having trouble sleeping, it's things that are not happening. It's only thoughts that they have, that things that could potentially happen. It's very interesting to me. The Chinese don't even have a word for stress. This is the closest it comes. They use the word crisis, and they have two characters. One means danger, one means opportunity. So it's all in the way we actually perceive things, right? Okay, so I want to mention this and get into the physiology a little bit before we actually get in how we can start fixing some of this stuff. Your adrenal glands are these two little lobes that sit on your kidneys. And they pump out these two guys, cortisol and adrenaline. Now, at different parts of the adrenals. And so you think of your adrenal glands and you think of your thyroid, and there's this constant tug of war, or even better, think of it as a seesaw, right? Now, if you have two children on a seesaw that are approximately the same age, size, and weight, the seesaw, it's fun, right? But then one kid gets bullied off, and here comes this kid twice the size, and boom, right? And she's crashing down into the ground. And that's essentially what's happening all day to us when we think, and if you think of the bully as a new source of stress in your life, okay? Now, how long that's going to last, it's hard to say. When these guys start to kick in, what they're essentially trying to do is to provide you with energy to be able to do the task and or get out of the way, right? So if there's a cab coming at you and it doesn't seem like the guy actually sees you, you are going to need as much energy and physical strength as possible to get out of the way. So the way that adrenaline does is it starts looking to mobilize sugar. As it's called glucose, it's called glycogen, and it's stored predominantly in your liver and your muscles. But here's the thing. You've been on a diet. You haven't been eating carbs. God forbid, sugar, right? You barely eat 1,000 calories a day. What you have for breakfast? A banana. Great. Okay? You've been doing this for 3 weeks. You're starving yourself. The cab's coming. Tries to tap into the liver and the muscles. Nothing there. We're on empty. Now, here's what I loved about the last talk, is I was trying to think of an analogy of how the body would communicate to one another if it had, and it just dawned on me, a stage manager, right? What do we got down there? We got nothing. Keep pumping adrenaline. Keep pumping. Get her out of the way. Once she's on the sidewalk, we could shut it down. Okay? That's essentially what's going on. All right. What do we got down in digestion? She's starving. Good. That's what I figured. All right. Give her a half hour. She'll get to something. So that's essentially exactly what's going on, and your body's trying to communicate with yourselves and do all these things. What's so cool is this stuff all happens on its own. You don't even have to think about it, right? All right, so now we know that what those two do. Cortisol, by the way, pulls energy from protein, right? So it starts to pull amino acids from protein sources. Where? Muscle. This explains the skinny fat girl, right? Real cute in the skinny jeans. On the beach, ooh, not so much, okay? Right? Marshmallowy look, right? She had a yogurt on Thursday. Because, for me, listen, Trust me when I tell you, I'm trying to make light of this stuff, and I have an enormous amount of empathy and compassion for a lot of the women in particular, and I don't mean to pick on you guys, but for some reason or another, my practice has become predominantly women. And it used to be women 50 plus. It's becoming more like 35 to 50. And I'm seeing the same exact problems, and a lot of it has so much to do with their personal appearance, right? Most people are doing this as much as they want to be healthy. They're suffering from insomnia, anxiety, fatigue, hair loss, constipation, but never end. The consultation will never end without her asking, will I lose weight? Because that buzzing in her head of, I want to be sexy, I want to be desirable, I want to be attractive, and I want to be thin. A lot of people associate thin to those things, okay? So that's a huge part of what's going on. And as much as I try to explain the physiology, it seems it always comes back to what it is that their own thoughts, their perceived thoughts of how they look and what's going on in their life and what their life is like, that's causing much of the problem. So when I try, this is part of the reason why I really try to focus on getting people to understand how it is that your body works. Instead of looking at what's on your plate, think about what's inside your head. Okay, so we know what these puppies do. Let's keep going. So, are you stressed, right? What are the signs of stress? A lot of people are disassociated from the physical manifestations of stress and psychological stress, right? Because most people say it all the time. How you doing? Stressed out. Stressed. How's work? Stressful. Right? I mean, it's the most overused word. You probably can't go a half hour without saying stressed, right? Stressed out. So what are some of the signs? This was stressful, preparing for this. So insomnia, right? Now, usually, it comes with this guy, right? So I might as well talk to them at the same time. So insomnia, a lot of people having trouble with sleep, and they're using all sorts of interventions, a lot of over-the-counter prescription meds. But what's really causing it? Well, we just talked about adrenaline. So if you're stressed out and you're pumping adrenaline pretty much all day, no major surge, hey guys, let's lower it a little bit, but let's not take it too low. Let's just keep it going a little bit longer. Adrenaline's pumping all day, your mind is racing. You got a lot to do. It's 4 o'clock, you're almost out of here, bang, you get an email, he wants it done before you leave. And you got to pick up your kid. Whoa, boom, adrenaline, more adrenaline, pumping. And guess what? You haven't eaten. Oh, I forgot, you had a banana, right? So now you're on fumes pretty much, but you need energy. And you need to be able to be focused because you got to get this done and get to school and pick up your kid on time so that everybody doesn't think you're a horrible mom or dad. So at this point, this usually happens, and I see this particularly more in women because guys after work, shut it down. Time for a cocktail, And granted, work can end as late as 8 o'clock at night for them, but they're shutting it down. Not her. No. She's throwing in some laundry. She's got to answer a couple of emails. She's trying to get the kid down, maybe reading a bedtime story. Adrenaline's pumping all night long, right? The whole room's illuminated. You got the laptop going, you got the iPad, you got the pad in the bed, you got the phone in your back pocket, you got the kid in one arm. It's all going all at once. And it's 10:30. So wouldn't it make sense that you're going to have a hard time sleeping? And let's suppose you're just a single person and you don't have all that responsibility or liability or all that responsibility. But there are things at work that you're frustrated with, the things about your life that you're frustrated. You want a bigger apartment, you want to make more money. You're not satisfied with your personal relationships, your romantic relationships, right? So all these things, and particularly at night is when this seems to get heightened, more because most people are alone, right? You start thinking about these things. And most people will tell me, my mind starts to race. It starts racing. And that's where the anxiety comes in. But it's usually because most of the stuff they're thinking about hasn't happened. It's not as if the stress that they have isn't real. Those things do exist. But it's them thinking of what can happen, how much worse it can get, that's really heightening things and causing the anxiety and the buzzing and having a hard time falling asleep. And I'll talk about some interventions to calm you down later in the night. So what are some other signs? Exhaustion. Well, obviously, if you're not sleeping, you're going to be exhausted, right? But if you're not eating, right? If you're not getting enough calories, if you're not getting enough food, so that when there is adrenaline as actually something to actually mobilize and move and get you to give you energy, that's going to be a problem. Cold hands and feet. Now, most people don't think cold hands and feet, what does that have to do with my metabolism? Well, if you are if you have a low metabolic rate or low metabolism and you're stressed out most of the time, you're going to have a hard time getting circulation and getting it to the extremities, because it's pumping stuff, but it's pumping it to vital organs that it needs. So you're not going to get the kind of circulation you want on your hands and feet. And I can't tell you how often I meet someone, I'm like, hey, how you doing? Whoa, thyroid. Really? It's like 80 out, right? And unless she was handling a frosted mug, she's got a thyroid problem, okay? I hate picking on the girls, but it's so often. And those cold feet, whoo, socks to bed, not sexy, not sexy. Okay, sensitive to the cold in general. It's cold in here. Is it cold in here? No, I'm cold. Always a little sensitive to the cold. Frequent urination. Stress hormones are essentially diuretics. So it's the same reason why when you get really anxious or worked up about something, maybe if you have a fear of coming up here and introducing yourself, you're going to need to pee. Okay? And this will happen throughout the day. So if you find yourself urinating frequently without necessarily drinking much, then chances are metabolic rates down. Sex drive, irregular menstrual. You know, the thing I probably ask people the most is, do you move your bowels? And how are you having a menstrual? These are two very normal physiological events that need to happen on the regular, right? I got guys all the time. You move your bowels? Pfft, I'm regular, every Tuesday. I'm like, Tuesday, bro? I go, dude, it's Thursday. I mean, you haven't moved your bowels in 2 days? Menstrual. I haven't had one since 1998. Like, really? It's not a good idea. We might want to take a look at that. All right. And the big one is always digestion. And the reason why I separate this one is because I kind of became like this digestion expert, because people typically come to me when they associate whatever's going on with food, right? So if they're having a digestive problem, it must be something they're intolerant to, or they're having a hard time digesting, right? So they usually come to me for this sort of thing. And it took me a long time to figure out that no matter what intervention I used, and a lot of time I had success, they felt a little better for a little while. It just wasn't sustainable because we weren't driving the metabolic rate. We weren't driving the metabolism enough to start fixing that. Remember, metabolism, metabolic rate slows down, everything slows down. Okay, so no matter, in fact, if you know anyone who's constipated and tries to use fiber products and they blow up, it's because nothing's gonna move through until you get that metabolic rate up, until you start driving that metabolism so it can actually start to contract things and move things out easily, okay? So that's usually a big one for a lot of people. Forms of stress. So there's lots of forms of stress, but I figured we just narrow it down to these three for today, because these are the biggies, right? So psychological stress we talked a little bit about, but let's go through a few of them. Alrighty. Now the first one doesn't really apply for all the next jumpers, but other people maybe it's something. By the way, you notice how much I'm drinking, right? I got a little adrenaline pumping, I'm excited, right? I'm a little nervous, I want to get it right. So what happens, right? Start to get a little cotton mouth. Why is that? Because when adrenaline starts to pump, the last thing that your body's thinking about is digestion and reproduction. We got no time. We got to keep things moving. So it starts shutting down digestion, and digestion starts where? In the mouth. Salivary glands, have a nice day. I got nothing. So I'm going to be drinking a lot of water, okay? Trying to take small sips. All right, mortgage, debt, divorce, dating. Do you like me? Do you think he likes me? I texted him, he emailed me back, but I never heard back. Well, where'd you meet him, on Tinder? I mean, you know, it's like, okay, this is causing a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. And I don't mean just young people, because I know a lot of the next jumpers are young people, right? 20s and 30s. I'm talking to women in their 40s, and they're really worked up. Divorce, 2 kids at home, dating, Tinder, checking the phone, the whole thing. It definitely can cause a lot of people death, disease, obviously having to take care of a loved one who's maybe suffering with some kind of disease, and you're starting to see an epidemic of our seniors with more dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. That's real stuff. That's stuff that a lot of people are coping with, right? Trying to cope with right now. Natural disasters, we mentioned, like something like Sandy comes and unexpectedly. Social anxieties, right? Being in crowds, things like that. A lot of people have all sorts of stuff like that they're dealing with. Body image insecurities, body dysmorphia. I'm fat, my legs are fat. My legs are fat, I hate my legs, they're fat. I'm like, okay. That's, you know, and again, it's really tricky. I'm not making fun of this stuff, and I gotta tell you, this is not my expertise. I have studied a little bit about it, about body dysmorphia, eating disorders, that sort of thing. There are people that I refer people to, but it's becoming prevalent. It's a problem. It's very hard to try and get somebody to feel better when they don't feel good about themselves. So it's definitely something that, it's becoming a bigger issue. Just negative thoughts, constantly thinking of the worst. Diet nutrition. Healthy eating can be very stressful, right? Is that gluten-free? Is that dairy-free? No corn, no soy, right? No saturated fats, right? No trans fats. People who are trying desperately to be healthy. In fact, I'm going to start a little support group for all the waiters and waitresses that I've actually put in therapy over the years, of people trying to be so puritanical, right? It's got to be clean, it's got to be organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, soy-free, corn-free. I'm like, that's not going to be very tasty. I got to tell you the truth. But the truth of the matter is that causes a lot of anxiety for people, and I'll talk about why maybe it doesn't matter as much. Self-imposed diet restrictions. I don't eat that. I don't eat that. Why? I just don't. Why? I don't eat it. So now when you put all these restrictions on there, when you're going, think about how much anxiety you're going to have if you're going to come on a social event, you're looking down at the table and thinking, I don't eat any of this. You're not going to eat. And you may not have eaten all day. In fact, you were planning on eating when you got to that event. Chronic calorie deprivation. This is a big one. We're going to talk about why it's so important you need to eat and why calories are so important. But there are some people who just deprive themselves of food because they're on some kind of restricted diet. I'm not really sure why they're on a restricted diet, but they in fact are and have been for a really long time. Salt, sugar deprivation. There's so many foods that all the nutrition experts have demonized over the last 40 years. Fats, carbs, sugar, salt, coffee. We've just pretty much removed just about every macronutrient we can eat. Binging on known food intolerances. Why does this happen? Why is it that you go all day, particularly people who might work here and they're going through a time of year where they're doing loads of coding and they're in the zone, right? Big, giant bear, okay? Lots of adrenaline. Boom, hyper focus, haven't eaten 7, 8, 9 hours. And what do? End of the day, when it all shuts down and the surge starts to come back down, they are ravenous and they can care less. If it resembles food, it's going down. And oftentimes people will start to binge on foods that they know are not a good idea. Okay? And you're likely not going to see them at work the next day. So that's part of the reason why the food deprivation thing is not a good idea, but I'll get more into it towards the end. Juicing and cleansing. Wow. I got pretty big on the detox kick myself, and I really, and it took me a few years to kind of figure that out as well. These rituals that people have of cleansing and purifying the body and using juiced food, pressing their food and blending their food and making super drinks, you really need to think, things are so often taken out of context, right? Most of the time, those rituals were done in an environment where most people were sitting around and praying all day, right? Meditating, spending time in the sun, walking in the sand, making love. This is all they did for 3 to 5, 10, 15 days while they ingested these foods. If you're taking the 6 train downtown to make an 8 o'clock and you're on a juice, good luck with that, okay? Because if you try doing that, how many people do you know go on a juice fast? They last 48 hours before they're like, dude, burgers, bear burger, 7 o'clock. I'm like, I thought you were juicing. Screw that. Famished, right? They're ravenous for food. Or even worse, after 3 days, I have a cold, I have the flu, I don't know what's wrong with me. Really? How about calories? You haven't eaten in 3 days. And you're trying to do all the tasks you typically do. Now, if you're going to go and take 3 days or so and relax, maybe spend some time on the beach, somebody you really care about, and sip on juices, and there's different interventions. There's ways of doing it. There's a lot of things that I integrate into my program to make sure that they're getting enough calories, they're getting enough salt and sugar and carbs and all the things they're going to need to be able just to survive those few days. Because most of the time, most people are not going to be able to do it entirely the way, unless you go to some sort of resort where they're going to provide you all the amenities for you to kind of be able to just do some light yoga and sleep a lot and get some sun and that sort of thing. And then shame and guilt, just feeling bad about everything you eat. I shouldn't have ate that. Let me get another. I can't. I really shouldn't eat that. I'll take that one. It's horrible. I mean, think about it, walking around feeling that way all the time, feeling bad about yourself and what you ate. All right, last one, what do we got? Exercise. Overtraining, too much. It's just way too much. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I see. We talked about the lack of calories, and then these people, usually the same people, insist on doing an excessive amount of aerobic, particularly aerobic exercise. Whoa, what happened here? We need back a slide. That must have been me, my bad. I gotta go back a slide. It'll come up. So this is not a good idea, for obvious reasons, right? Exercise, remember we talked about your body really can't make the distinction between you wrestling a bear and you thinking about wrestling a bear? Exercise is essentially another form of stress that's gonna fire up all the same hormones, right? So if you're doing lots of it and you have no food and no reserve, so you haven't been eating for days, there's no glycogen really stored in the liver and the muscles, we're gonna start breaking things down best way we can. This is part of the reason younger and younger women, you're starting to see bone loss and something called sarcopenia, the skinny fat girl, no muscle. It's all start coming apart. This happens in people too who are typically, and it's very interesting because there are a lot of women who they're very frustrated with their physique because they're eating so little and they're relatively thin. I always say, it's probably not a nice thing to say, but I feel like it's like almost the kiss of death. If you're the skinny girl in high school and the skinny girl in college, you start to become, Tony Robbins used to talk about this, how our identity, who we think we are, right? If you were the homecoming queen in 1968, you're still the homecoming queen. You're 50. You know what I mean? It's like, you're not that person anymore. And the skinny girl wants to insist on still being the skinny girl after giving birth to 2 babies and starting a practice and doing all that she does, but in her mind, she's still the skinny girl. And someone may have actually mentioned that she put on weight. And someone she cares about, or someone cares about her. That can cause a lot of anxiety as well. Can we get oh, here we go. Oh, we're way back. Oh boy. This is tricky today. All right, let's see if we can get through this. I got it. I'll get it here. I should have probably had these come all up at once. Let's see. By the way, one thing I didn't mention here is ignoring cravings. We really stop listening to ourselves. You know, there's a little something called biofeedback. If you are craving, there's a reason why, and I'll talk about it a little bit at the end, is why you're craving salt, sugar, and starchy carbohydrates, or essentially palatable foods. There's a reason why your body's asking you for those foods. And when you start ignoring them, that will cause a lot more adrenaline. First, you have to overcome the urge. That's going to drive adrenaline. Your body's already surging with adrenaline because it's asking you to feed it. And it's asking you to ask it very specific nutrients, and you're avoiding them. Oh, did I just not do that? One slide, one.
So when you go back,
dude, my adrenaline right now is pumping. Just one slide.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work. All right, fine. Oh, you're killing me. Can you go forward? Yeah, well, you know what? Let me get. Here, let me just do this.
Go ahead.
Where are we? That one. Pump it. And just. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't know. There you go. Sorry, guys. Okay. So exercise, way too much of it. A lot of fitness trends out there. CrossFitters, anyone? I have never seen, in almost 20 years of doing this, when I used to train women back in the day, they'd come in and people were much more reasonable then. Ange, I'm turning 50 in the spring. I'm like, great, it's January, we got plenty of time. Want to train a couple times a week, want to clean up the diet, you'll be fine. Most days today now, I have an event coming up. Great, when is it? Saturday. It's Wednesday? So they're not as reasonable. But certainly, a lot of people who are falling into some of these trends, it's interesting to me, is particularly this new physique that has kind of taken on in women. When women came to me back in the day, the first thing they mentioned, and the last thing they wanted to be, was big. I don't want to put on any muscle. Well, that's kind of sort of going to happen if we start lifting weights. But they insisted that's what they didn't want, and it seems today the trend has changed big time with the advent of CrossFit, right? And these are not people, I think the average age for a Tough Mudder race is like 40. These are not young people. These are people who've got a lot going on in their lives, and most of them doing a lot of the stuff that I already mentioned. They're calorie deprived, they've got an enormous amount of stress in their life, responsibilities and liabilities, and then they're taking on these enormous tasks of all this training, 10, 12 hours a week, as much as most professional athletes, to compete in these events for a t-shirt. So, and you're also dealing with addiction. If you feel in need, if there are people like, I just feel better when I exercise, I feel better when I exercise, I feel better when I exercise. Really? Why do you think that person feels better? This is also true of people who are very confrontational. When adrenaline is high, cortisol pumping, adrenaline pumping all day long, all of a sudden they have a bit of a lull. For whatever reason, quiet part of the day, things start to quiet down, things start to lower. This person doesn't feel very good. They start to get depressed. This is when a lot of people, and this is part of the reason why a lot of people you're starting to see more addiction with some of these psychotropics and things like Adderall and that sort of thing, right? People start to self-medicate. When you start to notice that someone, not acutely, meaning every once in a while somebody may be a little confrontational, argumentative at a certain time of the day, but if they tend to do it every day, nearly at the same hour, they just become very difficult. It's very likely that that person needs a new surge. And so they have to find it. And it's usually going to be in the form of exercise or confrontation, whatever it might be, to get themselves back up without having to consume food. Because food would pretty much do the trick. It would calm them down, at least for a little while. But they don't necessarily want to be calm. They prefer to be on that rush. That's why we call them adrenaline junkies, right? There are people who are addicted to this sort of stuff. You don't need to jump out of an airplane to be an adrenaline junkie. There are plenty of people out there, in the dating world especially, that are adrenaline junkies. All right, so let's take a look at how we could start monitoring some of this stuff. I'm going to go through just a real quick story. Dr. Broda Barnes, this guy was amazing because he was a general practitioner. He wasn't an endocrinologist. He wasn't a cardiologist. He had probably the most success of any doctor. He practiced from the 50s to about the 80s than anyone in the prevention of heart disease, and saved a lot of people's lives and improved the quality of the life of many people. But he was fascinated with the thyroid, and the reason why he got so focused on the thyroid, and I couldn't figure it out at first, and then it made perfect sense as a general practitioner, is that he felt the thyroid was oftentimes the unsuspecting underlying cause of so many chronic diseases. And if you're a general practitioner, you're dealing with everything. So why not go after the one thing that if you fix, you'll be able to create better health in these people? And he did it very simply. He just started having his clients, or his patients rather than using sophisticated lab works, he just started to focus on the outer metabolic rate and using temperature. Very simple intervention. Just take a thermometer, take your temperature every morning. And he found if they had a low temperature below 98.6, usually around 97, were consistent or congruent with other symptoms of someone who might have a low metabolic rate, chances are that person is suffering from a low metabolism. And if we improve that, we could probably improve the quality of their health. We necessarily not cure the disease, but certainly improve the quality of the person's health and vitality. He actually wrote a book years later, Solving the Riddle of a Heart Attack. Nobody read it, because by then it was like the 1970s, right? And we were hell-bent on cholesterol. We're going after cholesterol big time, right? If someone actually read that and paid attention, Dr. Oz would probably have a flower shop in Southern California. All right, these guys got an opportunity to know Rhoda and wrote this book. This is more updates, kind of a tribute to him, and they also integrated a lot of other ideas and philosophies from a lot of other different practitioners. I just want to get into more of what you guys can start doing. Okay, so what you need to start paying more attention to. Very simple. Take a look at your morning temperature, right? So you're using a digital thermometer, $8-10. Keep it on your nightstand before rising. If you've gone up and used the restroom, it's probably too late. If you want to get a more accurate reading, you want to do it while still lying in bed, jot it down, maybe on your phone, put it back down. You do this for about 2 or 3 consecutive days, you'll start to get a baseline. Okay. Now, typically, after rising and after your first meal, you should see your body temperature start to rise throughout the day, especially as you eat more food. Typically. You're going to see most people are going to be below 98 in the morning, and usually it'll start to rise. But if you haven't eaten, if you didn't eat breakfast, missed lunch, oh, you had a banana, and now it's nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, chances are you're going to start to be cold and hungry. Not everyone, but most people. And again, it also depends on where you are in your life. Context is everything. how old you are, right? How you live your life, how you cope with stress, what kind of stress you have in your life at this moment in time. All right. Hands and feet, pay attention. Are your hands and feet cold? You know, maybe not all the time, but at certain times of the day. It might mean you may need to eat. Also, how fast your hair and nails grow, but not just how fast they grow, but also the texture, the hardness of the nails and the texture of the hair. So these are things you could start paying more attention to monitor your own metabolism. Some more. Should have at least 1 or 2 bowel movements a day. Solid, no straining, and not having to use anything. Okay. Not having to use anything to actually deliberately bring it on. There's a lot of people who say the same when I ask them, do you move your bowels every day right after my latte? If you need some sort of stimulant, chances are, again, the metabolism might be a little bit low. So I might ask them not to have one for a day or 2 and see what happens if there's a change. What else? Digestion, should have good digestion. No bloating and gas after meals. Urinating every morning and about every 4 hours after that. If you start to urinate more often than not and you're not drinking much water, again, also might be a sign. Sleep soundly. In New York City, that's tough to do, but there are a lot of things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep, even with all that's going on. You know, if you live in a walk-up or you live on a busy, like I live near 23rd Street between 2 hospitals, it's not easy to get sound sleep all the time. I'm considering soundproofing my windows, but going to bed with your phone and laptop and dog and, I mean, there's all this stuff in your bed. You know, there are really simple, practical things you can do to start quieting your mind and relaxing before bedtime. Regular menstrual cycle with very little to no PMS signs and symptoms. Sexually, men should have regular erections and have good sex drive, strong urges. Same with women. Vaginal lubrication, good strong urges, especially during ovulation. So some of the more practical things you could start doing. So we talked about body temp, right? Before rising every morning, get a baseline. Start paying more attention to when you're cold and hungry, and if you're cold and hungry at the same time. Combining warming foods, calorie-dense foods, right? So palatable, salty, sugar, pay attention. Now these are all the foods you're told not to eat, but here's the thing. Think about any time when you have had a meal like this, how satiated and good you feel. Now people say, oh, I eat a meal like that, I want to pass out, I go right to sleep. Might be a reason for that. Oh, it's your blood sugar, it's all over the place. Not so much. If you're on fire, if your adrenals are just cranking all the time, and you actually have time to sit down and have a meal, and it's a very palatable, nutrient-dense meal, chances are you're going to want to go right to sleep right afterwards. Why? Because the adrenals just turn down, shut off. Sugar and salt and starchy carbohydrates especially start to nourish the adrenals. They're loving that. It's part of the reason why you guys go into a little bit of a coma right after Thanksgiving dinner, right? Because it's no holds bars, it's family time, it's pies and cookies and cake right after the meals. You're loading up. Here's the thing, you probably haven't eaten that stuff in weeks, maybe years, right? And suddenly you want to, and you don't like the feeling. But here's the thing, you need to go through that time in your life where you're actually nourishing yourself for a little bit, and you may in fact, oh my God, gain weight. It may happen, but you're going to start to feel a whole lot better. So essentially, you're rehabilitating your metabolism so that you can actually lose weight, but it's more sustainable. And you'll find those ratios. You'll find that sweet spot for yourself. Okay, we got to keep moving here. So rule of thumb, a person who's pretty weak, pretty sick, they're going to need a lot more food for a much longer period of time. If they're a relatively healthy person, just having a few issues, maybe not so much. They definitely need to eat more, but not as much or as calorie dense as someone else. These are some of the things that you need to start considering more of. Calories, right? Calories and carbohydrates are really going to depend. And when I say carbs, I'm talking about fruit, mostly starchy root vegetables, okay? Cooked down vegetables. Not so much on the grain, but that's a whole other talk. And also pay attention to how you feel after the meal, right? If you actually feel better when you're having it, then it's something you might need to consider putting back into your diet. I was kind of generous with this, but you know, most people, when they say 40-50% of your diet should consist of carbs, the truth of the matter is that if you live in New York City and you're doing all that most people need to do in New York City, listen, let's face it, crossing the street in New York City is traumatizing, okay? Let's face it. You need a lot of energy to get through this city and to do all you need to do. And if you started to feed yourself in the way you need to and start to think less about what you look like and what people think of you, you would feel amazing. In fact, you start to feel amazing about yourself because you're not so worried about it anymore. And then you could start worrying about changing your physical appearance. Maybe you have an event, maybe you're getting married, you'd like to lean out a little bit. But you have to remember that every time you do that, there are consequences. You may actually drop 10 or 12 pounds. If you do it slowly, it can be done, and you won't do too much metabolic damage and bring back maybe half of that weight for a short time. But if you're trying to do that for long periods of time or chronically, you're going to run into problems. Salt, we're running out of time, but man, this is a big one, right? Everybody's scared to death of salt. The truth is, salt, and most of the academics will tell you who study nutrition physiology, has nothing to do with blood pressure. And again, I'd probably have to come back and do a talk on salt. The Japanese and the Chinese probably consume more, as high as 30 grams of salt per day per person. And let me tell you something. I was thinking about this the other day and it made perfect sense. Someone was talking about the Japanese culture. You want to talk about some stressed out people. Anybody who just routinely jumps into the path of a moving train, those are pretty stressed out people. It's no wonder they eat so much salt. Salt is very calming and very nourishing to the adrenal glands. It's a medical intervention that's used every day in the emergency room. Somebody comes in, they're critically ill. What do? They hang a bag. You know what that is? That's saline. It's salt water. They're pumping salt into you. And as soon as you get out, lay off the salt. It never made any sense to me. I can't get my mom to eat salt, but I get her to soak her feet in Epsom salt almost 4 or 5 nights a week. That's how I get salt in her. Okay, she's got high blood pressure. I can't have that. What's the matter? I made my mother a Jewish woman just now. I can't believe it. All right. Adding salt, again, immediately you'll notice the temperature rise almost immediately. Salt is also a diuretic, so it's going to help mobilize sugar, which is what adrenaline essentially does. Helps with the conversion of T4 to T3, which is the active form of thyroid, which is what you want. And also when you're doing salt, remember we're not talking about table salt. Usually a sea salt, white, granulated, has no iodine added, none of the colored Himalayan salts. It's usually much more oxidized, not as many minerals. So just a simple sea. The best is pickling salt. You can find it online. Meal frequency, pay attention to how often you need to eat. If you're hungry, chances are you need to eat. That's a clue, okay? Stop ignoring the fact that you're hungry. Become more aware of when you're cold. You may need to eat. You may not have eaten enough. You may have eaten, but you may not have eaten enough. Remember, banana, probably not doing the trick. And also using a combination of these things. So combining these foods is really the trick. To try not just to eat one particular food, but make sure you're combining as much of the macronutrients as possible and adding a little bit of salt. Salt, really, the thing about salt too is there's no prescription of how much you should use. The more salt you use, the more salt will be in your tears and your sweat and in your urine. It's not like you can really overdo it with salt, but most people avoid it so much that adding a little bit will probably help. What else? I want to get thyroid stimulating foods. I'll just mention a couple. You know, when it comes to animal protein, especially for people who don't like to eat muscle meat, and when I say muscle meat, I'm not just talking about beef and lamb. I'm talking about chicken and pork and turkey. You're essentially eating the muscle of the animal. But there are lots of other sources, particularly dairy. If you're tolerant, people fear dairy. If you're not tolerant of dairy, there may be some people who have a genetic predisposition. There are others who chances are have a very low metabolic rate. You improve it, they become much more tolerant of dairy. Sometimes it needs to be raw dairy products. Sometimes it needs to be, just a much cleaner source of dairy. I get most of mine from the farmer's market on 14th Street. I am really fortunate that I'm very tolerant and I love dairy. And it's where I get most of my protein. Organic fruits and fruit juices, usually not from concentrate, and whole fruit, all sorts of fruit. Try to do local, sustainable, and also in season. Like, mangoes in December, maybe not so much. They're coming from Costa Rica anyhow. So the further they travel, less likely they've been picked a long time. They might have been sprayed, even if they claim that they're organic or sustainably grown. So just try to eat stuff that grows locally and you can get your hands on. And New York City, you can get your hands on a lot of really local food. Coconut oil, it's a superfood. It really is. You just got to go online and read a little bit more about the benefits of a saturated fat like coconut oil in so many ways. And it's a great way to get fats into your diet if you don't want to necessarily go full out on dairy products and other things. All right. These are the ones I wanted to kind of get to because they're the simplest. You know, there's a lot of ways you could start lowering your adrenaline and managing stress, and these are just a few. Okay, I call my super S's. Just combining these foods a little bit more, start integrating a little bit more into the diet. Pay attention to how hungry you are, how cold you are. Eat when you're hungry. Listen to your body is essentially giving you biofeedback. So start paying attention, start listening, right? Sleep. That's an entire talk. We definitely need more of it. Everybody does. We're sleeping probably less than 90 minutes more than we were even 100 years ago. Salt baths, I mentioned. The whole modality of taking a bath, 10 minutes to fill, 10 minutes in it, 3 or 4 cups of Epsom salt. It's a great way to get your salt. It's not super hot, by the way. Anything super hot, it's going to do what? Drive adrenaline, right? So you want to be nice and warm and comfortable for 10 minutes. It's totally calming and relaxing. Right before bedtime, it's a great idea. Getting more sun. There's a sun deck here in this building you guys have access to. Whenever you can get outside, you know, I mean, just step away, get some sun on your face and your extremities for 10 minutes. Take off your shoes, rest your feet on the ground. Putting your feet on packed earth, it's very calming. Earth gives energy, relaxes you. Right? These are really simple things you can do. Sustainable exercise, something that's fun. If you don't exercise, then start something fun that you enjoy doing. Maybe you want to dance, or even some sort of light yoga, or a combination of. Doesn't have to be everything all at once. Once you start to build some strength and raise your metabolism, you can integrate some more strength training and that sort of thing. Sex, do I really need to say anything about that? Although stress can drive adrenaline. The lack of it, too much of it, so you got to manage that as well. Silence, meditation, there's loads of apps that you can take 3 to 5 minutes of your day and just sit in silence, right? And if you can do it outside with your feet on the ground, even better. Combine as many of these as possible, right? Smile, laugh, 10 minutes of Funny or Die. Just, you know, step outside and have a laugh. Don't take life so serious, especially when you're staring into that box for 8-10 hours a day. You could probably use a good laugh, okay? So those are some of them, guys. I'm sorry we had a couple technical difficulties and it ran a little bit long. If you guys want to follow, listen, I know people's cats who have more followers than I do on Twitter, but so I really appreciate it. Anything that you guys want to, if you guys want to follow or take a look, I promise to start posting more stuff. I appreciate your time and your patience. Have a good day.